Let's talk a little bit about power rankings because there was a recent power ranking that
Sure.
was released from PFF. We'll go ahead and I'll read these off real quick, and we'll dive into a few questions on them. But remember, these are power rankings. It's not projected order of finish. It's just hey, who are the best teams really, essentially. So they have Texas, Oklahoma, TCU at 3, Kansas State, Baylor, UCF at 6. That's the first new program on the list there at the very highest, followed by Houston, Cincinnati, Oklahoma State at 9. BYU, Texas Tech, Iowa State at 12, and then the bottom two they have West Virginia and Kansas all the way down there at 14. It's an interesting power rankings, and maybe it's clickbait, but it's content. It's interesting to talk about because it's the off season, and so we kind of looked at this and said, okay, from what these power rankings are saying, OU is going to actually play 6 out of the 7 bottom ranked teams according to PFF, and only 3 of the top 7 teams there. So a very favorable schedule for OU, but of those bottom half teams, I'll list them off one more time here. The bottom 7, Cincinnati, Oklahoma State, BYU, Iowa State, West Virginia, Kansas, those are all on OU's schedule. Who do you think is the toughest game out of those?
Well, Adam, before we get to that question, I mean, just looking at this overall, your thoughts on 1 through 14. I mean, is there anything that sticks out? I mean, this team being way too low, way too high. I mean, I'll let you think about it kind of for a second here, but I mean, Kansas being the last team in the Big 12, I mean, it kind of feels like that's a little bit of a lazy take, and we're just kind of basing this upcoming year off of what we've seen in the past. And, we'll touch on them here in just a little bit once we dive into Oklahoma's schedule. But, Lance Leipold taking this team from 2-10 2 years ago to 6 wins from this previous season. Jane Daniels coming back. Kansas is one that seems way too high. The fact that PFF has Texas Tech number 11 all the way down there outside of the top 10. We'll obviously get into this as we get a little bit closer to the season, but I'm going to be pretty high on Texas Tech this upcoming year. I'd probably have them closer to the top 5. And then obviously Kansas State being at 4, that's kind of I guess I can understand it. I mean, honestly, I would probably have them at number 2, outside of Texas, and we can touch on that here in just a little bit. But yeah, I mean, kind of honestly, top to bottom, I don't know how you could justify having Texas Tech all the way down at 11, and you surely cannot justify having Kansas at number 14 behind West Virginia.
To me, Houston at 7 and Cincinnati at 8 seem way too high to me. I think those could be the bottom 2 teams in the entire conference. I think Cincinnati had a ton of turnover, and Houston maybe has some of the biggest adjustment to make up to this power level. So I think both of those programs could certainly fall quite a bit. Texas Tech is interesting because they shuffled through quarterbacks last year with Tyler Shuck finishing out the year, but they had a lot of injuries there. You look at him and you go, yeah, he's the highest ceiling player, but I think he's more limited than some of maybe the other guys that they've had at the quarterback position there. So I'm curious to see what Texas Tech is because they're definitely the trendy team that everyone's getting behind. And I think they're a solid team, but I just wonder like what is their ceiling, or are people going to game plan a lot more for them? Because Texas Tech and Kansas kind of have been probably the 2 worst programs over the last 4 years or so in the Big 12. And Kansas, another program that I think a lot of teams probably aren't game planning a whole lot for. And look where Kansas got last year. And so now I think teams are going to start saying, hey, let's spend some more time in preparation on Kansas. We're not going to overlook them. They're not going to sneak up on anybody. So I wonder if there is some regression to the mean for Kansas just because we know that they haven't stacked up the talent. They still had a ton of roster issues from the Charlie Weiss era that felt like they were still kind of working their way back from. So I do wonder if we've elevated Kansas too high, too fast based on one player that had some injury troubles last year. So I just wonder if Kansas has the depth when everyone's actually out looking for them at this point.
So who are you picking as the toughest opponent for OU in the bottom half?
I think I'm going to go with it's between the 2 state schools here, Oklahoma State or Iowa State. I'm going to go with Iowa State simply because we know that team is always going to have, I think, some level of physicality. I think they're always going to play you tough. And we know Matt Campbell will have that defense ready. They'll have a solid running game to some level. Hunter Decker's return, so you have some experience at quarterback there. I think that's tough. I know it's earlier in the year for OU, so OU might still be figuring some things out. Oklahoma State is kind of me just betting on, okay, Oklahoma State's not expected to do much, so therefore they're probably going to be pretty good. That seems to be how things roll for Mike Gundy. And I do like Alan Bowman. He's a guy that kind of torched OU. I think it was back in 2018 at this point. So he's been around for a long time. And OSU's got some dudes. Mike Gundy will coach up some nobodies that you've never heard of. And they'll be tough. It'll be a tough game there in Stillwater for the last Bedlam for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, Alan Bowman was actually the quarterback for Texas Tech back during that matchup with Kyler Murray, and wasn't he the one that he took the? It was during halftime. He was playing catch, and he took the he bent over and had a spinal issue or a collapsed lung or something.
Was that what it was?
I think that's what it
Okay.
was. But
He had some
I think
freak injury, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the consensus kind of coming into that game was OU, despite Kyler Murray playing as well as he did in the second half, Oklahoma probably loses that game if Alan Bowman was able to, play. But just kind of looking at this, man, obviously, according to PFF, Oklahoma's going to be facing 3 of the top 7, 6 of the bottom 7. Just starting with Kansas here for me, man. Like I alluded to, record improving from 2-10 to 6-7 a year ago. Lance Leipold has got this Kansas program moving in the right direction, and he's got coming back. I think a lot of credit needs to be given to Jalen Daniels. I think that he's probably a top 2 or 3 quarterback in the Big 12 in this upcoming season. He's going to continue causing headaches for defensive coordinators all season long. Cincinnati, like you alluded to, being in the top 8 in these power rankings. The main reason that this game would worry me as an Oklahoma fan is because this will be the conference opener in Cincinnati's first home game as a member of the Big 12. I know that Nipper Stadium only holds about 40,000 fans, but that place is going to be sold out. This is going to be the Oklahoma's first game of the season in a hostile atmosphere. How is this group going to react? But, new head coach Scott Satterfield inherits a team with a brand new coaching staff and only 7 of 22 starters coming back from this team a year ago. So that's a big ask for Cincinnati. I'm not quite on board with you on Oklahoma State. Most question marks. I think with OSU, this is the most question marks surrounding a team going into a season that I can really ever remember since Mike Gundy got to Stillwater. You're breaking a new quarterback. Many people expect it to be Alan Bowman. Yes, they've got a couple of solid ball carriers in the backfield in Jaden Nixon, who Oklahoma fans should be familiar with, and Ollie Gordon II. But for me, the biggest question mark is on defense. They're bringing in a first-year coordinator in Brian Nardo. He's bringing in his 3-3-5 scheme to a defense that only returns, I believe it's 2, maybe 3 starters from this defense a year ago. And I know that it's going to be the last Bedlam for a while. I know it's going to be in Stillwater. The Polk fans are going to be juiced up. But that doesn't concern me too much, especially given the fact Mike Gundy's 3-15 against Oklahoma. Are you really that high on Iowa State? I mean, I know they were 4-8 a year ago, and I don't expect Matt Campbell to miss a bowl game for 2 straight years, but Hunter Decker is still a quarterback, and Iowa State is going to have to find a way to replace the skill talent that they lost, especially Xavier Hutchinson. Will McDonald's gone to the NFL. But that Iowa State defense is coming off of a year where they led the Big 12 in rush defense. They led in total points given up, but I don't know. I'm not too high on Iowa State this coming year.
I'm not either. I could easily see them going 4-8 again, but I know that style of team and that style of coach that can really make that game closer than it really should be, because most of Iowa State's games last year, I think something like 10 out of the 12 were 1-possession games. So even though they weren't a good team, they can play a difficult game with you. They probably aren't going to win all of those. So that's kind of just what I'm getting at. Is I think it's tough. I think where it's positioned early in the year, I think that can be a tougher matchup.
I think that you make a really good point. That could be a sneaky trap game for Oklahoma, given the fact that it's sandwiched between a road trip to Cincinnati and you've got OU Texas the following weekend. So maybe a kind of a look-ahead spot for Oklahoma. But if Oklahoma takes that next step and they are the team that we expect them to be, they should take care of Iowa State pretty handily. Now, let me get to my last one here, because I actually think that this is the one that scares me the most. It's BYU on November 18th. One thing about the Cougars is they're going to be very battle-tested by the time the Sooners come out to town on November 18th. BYU's got non-conference games on the road in Fayetteville against Arkansas. They've got games at TCU in Fort Worth, at Texas down in Austin, and they also have to host both Iowa State and Texas Tech. So another familiar face, Adam, kind of feels like the transfer portal is bringing back a lot of older veterans that Oklahoma's going to see on their schedule. At quarterback, BYU is going to be starting Keaton Slovis, the Pittsburgh transfer, to go along with a bunch of new faces, most notably Aiden Robbins, the running back transfer out of UNLV. I know this is a team that struggled a bunch defensively last year, has a new coordinator going into this upcoming season, but for some reason, and we've kind of felt this way ever since the schedule got announced, that road trip out to Provo scares me the most when you look at the opponents on the back half of this schedule. It's going to be cold, high altitude. The stadium's going to be rocking, and Oklahoma's going to be coming off of a tough 4 game straight since the bye week. So BYU's probably the one that's got me the most worried out of all those teams in the back half of the schedule.
I was just looking at BYU's schedule from last year to kind of see, what adjustment are they going to have to make from a Power 5 opponent perspective. And they do schedule some tough teams. They played Baylor and Oregon. They played Notre Dame, Arkansas, Stanford last year. But that's it. So they're definitely going to see a pretty big jump. So I'm not as concerned, and probably for the same reason I'm not as concerned about TCU, is that by the end of the year, those are the teams that are going to have less depth than Oklahoma is. They may be beat up, not necessarily TCU, but BYU probably will be, because although they've recruited at a pretty high level for a long time, they're also making a big adjustment here to the amount of Power 5 teams that they're going to be playing on a regular basis. So I'm not as concerned about that. How about another new team, UCF, number 6 according to PFF here, kind of sneakily high, a team that I think a lot of people would say, yeah, they're probably the best position to go into a power conference and have immediate success because they've been a good program for a very long time. They are in Florida. They're recruiting a lot of really good players. They're working in the transfer portal. John Rice Plumlee, their quarterback, an example of that, transferred from Ole Miss after Matt Corral, kind of took that job. And I don't think there's any shame in that, losing out a job to Matt Corral. And you've got Gus Malzahn at the helm, who's won a national championship. So you've got guys that have done it at a high level that are already there. Are we maybe overlooking or discounting the I shouldn't say the Golden Knights, they'll get mad at me, the Knights?
Well, I surely hope Oklahoma's not. I think that when you look at these 4 newcomers that are joining the Big 12 this upcoming season, both in coaching with Gus Malzahn and from a talent standpoint on the roster, I think UCF sits in the best position out of those 4 teams right now. And, one of the good things about Oklahoma is you get UCF at home. And obviously that's going to be a game that's got major storyline implications surrounding Jeff Levy, surrounding Dylan Gabriel, both guys that, played and coached, recently at UCF. So I think that that's one that they're definitely going to have Oklahoma's attention. And, to even take it one step further, Adam, all 12 of these opponents on Oklahoma's schedule, you're coming off of a 6-7 year. Every single one of these teams better have your attention because you cannot afford to repeat this season results from a year ago. So, yeah, UCF's definitely something that Oklahoma fans should be keeping an eye on.
Let me ask you this one. We've talked a lot about how OU needs to have improvement this year. They need to be, I think most people are saying 9 wins. I think it needs to be even higher, a higher bar than that. But a lot of people saying 9 wins. A lot of people saying, hey, we need to see the improvement out there to know that this ship is headed in the right direction, that Brent Venables is indeed our guy. And you look at this schedule, according to PFF, OU's playing a lot of not so great teams from the Big 12, bottom half teams. And OU was one of those teams last year, so they're going to have to get out of that cellar themselves. But is it possible that we could be looking at, the end of the year and OU's played a bunch of these teams that, as predicted right now are not so great. OU has a good record, 9-10 wins or so, and not really know if this team has improved just because of the schedule being a little bit lighter.
Yeah, I think that's highly possible, and I think you make a good point. For me, I think that the floor, when you look at this schedule, is 9 wins. This should be a 10-win football team, though, as we sit here on June 27th. But, Adam, in my opinion, we're not going to truly find anything out about this team until the Cotton Bowl. Kind of feels like we say that almost every single year, but I think that really hits home for this upcoming season. You've got Arkansas State, SMU, road trip to Tulsa. Those should be 3 easy non-conference wins there that the Sooners, honestly, if they're playing their A game, shouldn't be challenged. So I don't think it's going to tell us much. Hell, last year after week 3, we were ready to pencil Oklahoma into the college football playoff after they went up to Lincoln and beat the Cornhuskers by 35. And we all know how that season turned out. But I think the road game at Cincinnati could be a challenge because of the crowd and the atmosphere alone. But if Oklahoma has taken that next step, they should take care of business. I've already given you my thoughts on Iowa State. I know it's Matt Campbell, and he always plays Oklahoma, tough since he's been up there in Ames. But we're going to find out about Oklahoma on October 7th. This is the measuring stick. It is every single year. Quinn Ewers year 2, the best collection of skill talent in the conference, with most notably Xavier Worthy and Jatavion Sanders. Texas is going to be in their defense is going to be in the 3rd year under Pete Kwiatkowski. They made some significant strides a year ago. And 1 year ago, Adam, and this is the biggest thing of all, you got your ass whooped 49-0. So Oklahoma better show up, pissed off, ready to go on October 7th when they make the trip down to Dallas. But then you round out the season with 4 very winnable games against UCF, Kansas, Oklahoma State, West Virginia, before BYU and TCU to close it out. So it is a very favorable, very favorable schedule by comparison to years past. So I think that one of the biggest things too, Adam, that you've brought up on this podcast time and time again, you don't have to play Baylor, you don't have to play Kansas State, you don't have to play Texas Tech, 3 teams that you lost to a year ago. So I expect this team to win a minimum of 9 games, and we'll find out just how far they've come after we walk out of the Cotton Bowl on the 7th of October.
Kind of in contrast, or maybe even in similarity to the power rankings, are the Big 12 odds. We went and looked those up from FanDuel. A little bit of difference, a little bit of variation from what Vegas thinks are the best teams that have the best chance to win the Big 12 versus what PFF has here. I'll read these off, maybe some of the ones that stand out. Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas State are going to be your leaders there with the best odds to win the Big 12 in that order. And then there's some pretty big differences. Whereas Kansas was dead last on odds or on the power rankings, they're a little bit more towards the middle as far as what Vegas is concerned. They're plus 4,800. And for those who are not big bettors or Vegas people, basically that just means, hey, if you bet $100 on Kansas, you're going to win $4,800 plus your money back. So when we give those odds, that's an easy way to translate that. But Kansas a little bit different there. Vegas really low on Houston. They were ranked really high by PFF. They're all the way at the bottom with plus 12,000 on odds. BYU right above them at plus 10,000. So a lot of variation and difference there. But Tyler, overall on some of these odds, what stands out to you the most as far as what Vegas is predicting?
Well, I think that they're trying to bait you into taking Texas. Pretty heavy favorite by comparison. At least double the favorite to the next closest team, which is Oklahoma. We'll obviously touch on it here in a little bit. Kansas State and Texas Tech are really good plays. Obviously, Kansas State a little bit more realistic of an opportunity, but if you wanted to take a flyer on somebody, Texas Tech at plus 1,100 wouldn't be, a bad bet if you wanted to throw, $20 down on it. But honestly, just kind of looking at this, Vegas with their odds to win the Big 12 championship, these kind of follow the lines of where I'm kind of more in tune with in terms of power rankings. Obviously, like you said, Houston's going to be one of the bottom feeder teams this upcoming season. I'm still kind of shocked on how high Vegas and honestly PFF thinks about Cincinnati. Obviously, Luke Fickell's no longer up there in Ohio, breaking a brand new coach, and Scott Satterfield is going to, be bringing in a brand new scheme, a lot of new faces. The fact that, both of these sites are so high, on the Bearcats is kind of shocking. I never thought I would live in a world, Adam, where in college football in the Big 12, Kansas would have better odds to win the conference than Oklahoma State. So that was kind of one of the other things that kind of stood out. So shout out to Lance Leipold and the direction that he's got this Kansas program moving in.
Yeah, Oklahoma State you mentioned at plus 5,000, just below Kansas at plus 4,800. So pretty interesting there. You look at those top 3, Texas plus 125, Oklahoma plus 340, Kansas State plus 470. And then there's a pretty big drop. Goes down to Texas Tech and Baylor, both over 1,000 at that point. So Vegas is definitely thinking, hey, the top 3, there's a pretty good separation there. And Kansas State, to their credit, they're bringing back their entire offensive line. Skylar Howard looked great towards the end of the year. They do lose, Deuce, but I think they've got some nice pieces. I think Kansas State's kind of one of those teams that does have a pretty defined floor. And you've got a guy in Skylar Howard that could probably really raise that. It's something that I think K-State has been missing for quite a while. Adrian Martinez had some injuries. Maybe he was going to be that guy, but Skylar Howard, I keep saying Skylar Howard.
Yeah.
It's Skylar Thompson. Or Will Howard, sorry.
Will Howard.
There's too many Wills and Skylars at K-State. But Will Howard, yeah, he's a guy that I think kind of just took the reins and said, I'll be the difference maker. And so maybe he's the guy that's going to do it again. I kind of have doubts, though, because we've seen the Big 12 ever since they went back to that conference championship game format. There's always been different teams that are getting there, teams that you didn't expect at the beginning of the year. Go back to last year. No one expected TCU. K-State was probably a dark horse at best. Go back the year before that. Nobody thought Oklahoma State or Baylor was probably going to be there. Go back the year before that. Nobody thought, hey, it's going to be Iowa State, TCU, Baylor. Like, we can go back and back year after year after year. There's always a team that's not there. But is this year going to be different in your opinion? Do you think it's going to be the top 3, or do you see someone else really making a run here?
Well, Adam, the same 2 teams have never played twice in the Big 12 championship game since they kind of brought that format back at Cowboy Stadium. But no, I think that Vegas does have it picked right here. Texas, OU, and Kansas State, those are the heavy favorites, obviously. I think that the Big 12 championship or Big 12 champion is in that group of three right there. If you made me take those three or the field, I think that by far and away, those are the three best teams in the conference for the upcoming season. I mean, honestly, we've talked about this in the group chat. I hate to say that I'm buying into it, but I'm going to be high on Texas this upcoming year, and obviously we're going to find out just how good Texas is when they make the trip up to Tuscaloosa in week 2. But like I said, Quinn Ewers, as bad as he was for most of the season, he's going to have, from the offensive line all the way to the collection of skill talent that's going to be surrounding him, there's not going to be a better group, in the conference for the 2023 season. Oklahoma, I'm in wait and see mode. They've got the tools. We've all seen the blue chip ratio. Oklahoma's got the talent. We've brought in some transfers at some key positions, predominantly, in the trenches. Kansas State, like you said, you've got Will Howard. Can he build on a fantastic back half of last season, lead them to another Big 12 championship behind that starting offensive line, which all 5 of them return? But yeah, I don't think that it is going to be wide open. Obviously, Oklahoma does not have to play Kansas State. Kansas State has to make the trip up to Austin to take on the Longhorns in Austin. So, yeah, I think that Vegas is they've hit the nail right on the head here. I think that these are the 3 best teams in the conference, and the champion's going to come out of this group.
If I had to force you to identify a lower half team, so we'll draw the line at UCF at 3,500 plus 3,500. Anyone below that, so that's UCF, that's Iowa State, that's Kansas, Oklahoma State, Cincinnati, West Virginia, BYU, or Houston. Those are considered your long shots to, let's just say, make it to the Big 12 championship game. Is there a team in there that you would say, hey, I think that they have maybe the pieces if everything falls right?
Oh, God. If everything falls right, and I can't even believe I'm going to say this, but I'm probably going to go with Oklahoma State here at plus 5,000. I think that let me try to prove this because I'm not even sold on it, but you've given me some really bad teams to have to choose from here. Mike Gundy hasn't had a losing season in Stillwater in a long, long time. I know that he's got a brand new quarterback to break in Alan Bowman, new scheme on the defensive side of the football with a bunch of stars that they've got to replace. But Oklahoma State, you look at their schedule. They don't have to play TCU. They don't have to play Baylor. They don't have to play Texas. Their biggest 2 games of the year is going to be BYU and Oklahoma. And they get Oklahoma, their arch rival, on their home field up there in Stillwater, Boone Pickens Stadium. So if you made me take a flyer, if Alan Bowman pans out, if they can continue to run the football and the defense can be better than what it was a year ago, especially with that brand new 3-3-5 scheme that they're bringing up there, I guess OSU's the play. Everywhere else underneath, I just don't see it.
OSU was the one that I had circled as well. For the same reasons that we look at OU's schedule and say, yeah, 10 wins minimum. I mean, look at OSU's schedule. They avoid Texas. Their 2 toughest games are at home versus K-State and versus OU. After that, their next toughest game is maybe either BYU at home or at UCF. Maybe Kansas hosting. Like, that gets real slim pickings of what the next toughest game is at that point. So again,
Yeah.
it's all belief and buy-in on, hey, we respect Mike Gundy. He's a weird guy. He sometimes, loses bedlam overthinking things, but otherwise he wins a lot of games, and he does it without the best players. He doesn't recruit super well, but he finds a way, and so that schedule's super easy. And I know there's tons of questions. They had lots of guys leave. They had random players coming in from D3 schools and D2 schools in the transfer portal, and you just wonder, there's no way that, he's going to be able to put this together. But I have to look back at OSU's track record, and I have to at least respect it and say, even though I don't see it coming whatsoever, the path's there from a schedule perspective and from a past track record perspective. So I have to at least respect it. I can't really give much else beyond that kind of gives me hope.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing to think about the possibilities Mike Gundy would have up at OSU if he actually put an emphasis on recruiting on a consistent annual basis. But Iowa State, I mean, you made some good points about them earlier in the episode, Adam, but I mean, Iowa State's schedule, just Big 12 alone. I mean, starting out, you've got OSU, you've got to go to Norman, then you've got TCU, then you've got back-to-back road trips where you've got to go to Cincinnati and Baylor. Oh, and then by the way, you're closing 3-game stretch for Matt Campbell's team at BYU up in Provo, home against Texas, and then you close out the year in Manhattan against Kansas State. So I don't expect Iowa State to go 4-8 a year ago, but like they did a year ago. But when you look at that schedule, if Matt Campbell makes a bowl game this upcoming season with that roster up there in Ames, you got to give this coach you got to give this guy a lot of credit. But yeah, I guess I'm going to go with Oklahoma State as kind of a sleeper if I had to take a flyer and put some money on it.
Last one here I'll ask you before we wrap up the show. TCU, a team that we haven't talked a whole lot about this evening, but a lot of people think, hey, that's probably OU's second toughest game after Texas. I personally think it's Iowa State because of where it's scheduled earlier in the year. But TCU, coming off a national championship game appearance, Vegas has them plus 1,900, right there at number 6, I guess, best odds in the conference to win the Big 12. The PFF rankings have them a little bit higher. They have them rated at 3. Some variance there. So are we, maybe not just as OU fans, but college football fans in general, are we overvaluing TCU, or should we have the Horned Frogs a little bit more the way Vegas does as more of a middle-of-the-pack team?
I think that kind of remains to be seen. I'm more in line with, I think, PFF's thought process, because PFF has them at what? They've got them at 3?
3.
Right? 3. I wouldn't have them quite that high, but I would probably have them, right around that 5 spot, right around that 4 to 5 spot. Obviously, I think that TCU, it was the best story in college football a year ago, what this team was able to overcome. Obviously, first year new head coach in that program, and then you just kind of look at the schedule with what TCU's got in front of them this upcoming fall. They've got Colorado. I know that Deion's there. That's a win. Nichols, Houston, SMU, West Virginia, at Iowa State. There's a very realistic chance that this TCU team is 6-0 when BYU comes to town on October 14th. So if you can figure out a way to get out there to 6, maybe 7-0, I think that puts TCU in a really good position. But I'm just not quite there yet, because I know that Chandler Morris, obviously, he was good up until he got hurt a year ago. The Max Duggan took his job away and never gave it back to him. But TCU's been very active this offseason in the transfer portal. Especially the most notable addition is Tommy Brockermeyer from Alabama, the offensive lineman. So, again, if TCU can figure out a way to rattle off 6 or 7 straight wins this season, and then you find a way to maybe win 2 or 3 out of this closing stretch. Listen to this, Adam. TCU's final 6 games this year: at K-State, at Texas Tech, Texas, Baylor, at OU on a short week. So you better get it while the getting's good early in the season. Once you flip that page to November, it's going to be tough sledding for the Horned Frogs.